Welcome back to Punchboard Pagoda. I'm Eric, and today we're diving back into the discussion I started on the previous episode, focusing on curriculum designs for teaching jiu-jitsu and MMA in general. Last time I went over key concepts when creating a curriculum and how to be mindful about managing it. Today we'll be focusing our efforts on understanding how to do an analysis of the learner group that we are wanting to teach these techniques to. Specifically, we'll be focusing on how we can improve the way we design instruction around jiu-jitsu specific techniques. Like last time, this is less of a how to make a curriculum, as that's a simple and easy thing to do and replicate. However, understanding how and why various components of curriculum design work the way that they do is arguably far more important to learn. And that's what I'll be trying to educate you all on today. So as with the previous episode, today's discussion is focusing on curriculum, learning theories, and practical strategies that can be used to make a real difference in jiu-jitsu program designs. This analysis today will be justifying and proposing learning strategies using a taxonomical analysis with the goal to enhance alignment between the three curriculums we discussed last time, which are the intended, enacted, and experienced curriculums. We'll be using the topic of a double leg takedown technique as the main contextual framing for this discussion. And after this discussion on the intended curriculum and the taxonomical analysis, I'll be providing an analysis of the learner group characteristics and concluding this all with justification of a instructional strategy based on the analysis I provide. So let's first start with the foundation. The Alliance Kids Jiu-Jitsu program, which I discussed last time, was part of the Alliance Korea curriculum in South Korea. It was created to give kids under 14 years old the skills and knowledge that they need to train and compete in jiu-jitsu as a sport. It's a structured curriculum made up of core topics broken into modules with techniques branching off from each one. What's great about this design is that it doesn't just rely on repetition. It uses both formative and summative assessments to help track progress. These assessments happen in live and semi-realistic sparring situations where the students have the opportunity to clearly demonstrate whether or not they have the technique proficiency to the instructor. So to begin, we should first have a discussion on the intended curriculum of teaching a double leg takedown. This elected topic of a technique can be categorized as a localized curriculum. While learning jiu-jitsu as a whole can be considered centralized learning due to its holistic nature, the process of learning an individual technique would fall under localized learning. And this is mostly because it involves specific steps, positioning, and education utilizing a specific skill set to do so. It's important to note that while this technique is a localized learning component, it is still contributing to the overall understanding of jiu-jitsu as a centralized learning endeavor. Proficiency in localized skills ultimately contributes to a broader competency of jiu-jitsu. The instructional design of the intended curriculum is one that is heavily controlled with evidence of learners' progress and learning outcomes being monitored by the instructor. To determine a taxonomical analysis, consideration of the goals of learning must be taken into account. The learner's goal is not only to learn the process of the technique, but to practically apply it in realistic contexts. It has been argued by researchers that breaking the goals into steps allows for components of the overarching goal to be identified, which in turn can then be classified using a taxonomy model. In the context of this jiu-jitsu technique, it is requisite for a learner to be able to remember and understand the components of the technique, as well as be able to assess when to apply it in real situations. Additionally, understanding the value of a technique provides to the overall jiu-jitsu development of the learner, on top of being able to be open to guidance and feedback on the execution of the technique itself. Finally, developing the necessary motor skills and skilled movements to execute the technique is required to properly learn its usage. Thus, it becomes clear these requirements for learning fall within what Bloom and his co-researchers identified as the three domains of learning: cognitive, or knowledge, affective, attitude and behavior, and the psychomotor domain, also known as skills. Therefore, it leads to the determination that Bloom's taxonomy is best suited for this form of learning. Bloom's taxonomy helps provide a hierarchical structure for organizing and sequencing learning objectives and instructional activities. As the instruction moves from an initial introduction of concepts, it becomes increasingly more and more complex. The procedure is to utilize grips, body positioning, leverage, and timing to then cause the opposing person to become off balance and be forced onto the ground. With regards to the taxonomy's cognitive domain, learners acquire knowledge and understanding of the technique. They first remember the name of the technique. Then they might remember the steps and key elements associated with the initial setup, footwork, and control of the opponent. Next, they are trained to understand the principles and mechanics behind the technique's usage, allowing them to grasp the effectiveness of its use in various situations as they arrive. Later, as they apply the technique in controlled practice drills, the learners develop greater proficiency in executing the technique itself. Now, moving on to the psychomotor domain of the taxonomy, which can best be described as the process where learners progress from imitation to manipulation, precision, and articulation. In the context of jiu-jitsu, they observe and imitate the movements as shown by the instructor, carefully studying the footwork, body positioning, and timing. After consistent practice, they manipulate their own bodies to execute the technique with greater fluidity and control. It is crucial for attention to detail to occur so as to achieve precision, ensuring that each aspect of the technique is performed correctly. As they gain greater proficiency, learners then articulate their skills by seamlessly integrating the technique into live training and sparring sessions. Through this repetition and refinement of the technique, the development of muscle memory and the ability to execute it instinctively is attained by the learner. Now, this leads us to the third domain, which is the affective domain, and it also plays a vital role in the learning process. At the receiving level, learners recognize the importance and relevance of the technique as it applies to jiu-jitsu. They would understand that mastering the technique is essential for gaining advantageous positions and control of their opponents. Responding to the techniques involves displaying a willingness to learn and practice and being receptive of the application. Additionally, they learn to value the strategic use of the technique within the context of jiu-jitsu. As such, they then are able to recognize its potential benefits towards setting up submissions, securing dominant positions, and controlling where the jiu-jitsu match is taking place. As they develop this, they are then able to organize and integrate the technique into their own overall game plan, thus showing understanding when and how to effectively apply it. Characterization can occur when the learners are able to execute the technique with consideration of their training partner's safety and well-being, thus embodying sportsmanship. Bloom's taxonomy promotes a balanced and holistic approach to learning, fostering both knowledge acquisition and skill development with regards to this specific jiu-jitsu context. By using Bloom's taxonomy, there is a need for analysis to be done on the intended learner group in order for it to be effectively used as an educational tool. Researchers in education have argued that knowing learning characteristics with respects to instructional design is necessary, as it will help shape the design of the goal outcomes within the intended curriculum itself. Therefore, employing the framework analysis of the four components, namely cognitive characteristics, physiological characteristics, affective characteristics, and social characteristics, is considered a more suitable approach for selecting strategies in the intended curriculum as opposed to relying on the similarities differences framework. As there is no entry requirement for learners to participate in the program that I taught, we can identify the learner group as learners who are children who have a minimum to zero prior knowledge within the context of jiu-jitsu. However, it is possible for some of those learners to have held prior knowledge that could apply to the technique and its learning process, such as experiences in similar sports like wrestling, judo, or even gymnastics. There are methods for an instructor to attain that knowledge and determine the relevance to the context of jiu-jitsu. This is done through nonverbal communication, and it's usually through the display of different jiu-jitsu belt rankings. Under the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation's guidelines, there are belt stripes and belt colors to indicate an individual's experience and knowledge within the hobby and sport of jiu-jitsu. Additionally, information sheets are typically used as part of the enrollment process, along with direct interviews and discussions between the children's parents and the head instructor, so as to help determine the main goals of the parent as well as the learner and assess their suitability for the program itself. The information gained from this process can help the instructor to identify the age, as well as interpret any cultural or gender-specific differences about the students based off the personal details that they provide in this process. In addition, it also should be noted that there are learning preferences which an individual learner would choose if they were given a choice. As jiu-jitsu is a subject that focuses heavily on physical movements, the neuro-linguistic programming, also called NLP, is most applicable of a system to consider under this framework. NLP situates around the learner favoring visual, auditory, or kinesthetic forms of learning. Visual learners, as implied by the name, prefer to learn by seeing through visual observation. Auditory learners prefer to learn through instruction and lectures on the selected topic. And finally, kinesthetic learners prefer to learn through doing the targeting objectives. Each of these apply to the context of jiu-jitsu, as an instructor is able to give visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning opportunities throughout the entire course of the learning session. Visual instruction is provided through demonstrations, while auditory instruction is typically provided in conjunction with this to elaborate on key concepts and details. Finally, kinesthetic learning is afforded through practice time for drills or realistic applications via sparring. Understanding these three learning preferences can help better serve towards a holistic learning environment for the students. Furthermore, research has emphasized the importance of learner analysis as a fundamental step in instructional design. They noted that cognitive characteristics play a significant role in the learning process, and that assessing the capabilities and previous knowledge of the learner is very much essential. When applied to a jiu-jitsu program, it's important to consider their understanding of basic concepts related to jiu-jitsu and the student's own ability to grasp new techniques. In order to identify these specific characteristics, instructors can use verbal communication to determine and interpret comprehension of the topic of focus for the day. By identifying these cognitive differences, the instructor can then adjust the content, pacing, and complexity to ensure optimal learning outcomes. Physiological characteristics were also noted as a key characteristic to consider under this approach. Children participating in jiu-jitsu programs can vary in terms of age, size, strength, coordination, and agility. This information of the learner group can be attained through observation of the individuals by the instructor. It's important to assess these characteristics, as these factors influence the physical capabilities and limitations when performing the technique. Considering the physical development of each child and adapting the approach accordingly is necessary, as well as modifications to accommodate such physiological differences. Affective characteristics are also best defined as those that encompass emotional and motivational aspects of learning. When applying this to a kid's jiu-jitsu setting, a child's interests, enthusiasm, and self-confidence in learning a specific technique can play a significant role in ensuring the learning outcomes are achieved. It is possible to identify these characteristics, again, through observation of the learner's demeanor and behavior, as well as through direct communication with them. Finally, social characteristics are also significant within this learner group. Social dynamics occur naturally among children, as well as in the instructor-student relationship. As such, peer interactions and group dynamics can impact motivation and participation on top of skill development. Much like affective characteristics, social characteristics can also be identified through observation and direct communication with the students. Additionally, it's not uncommon for children to sign up for jiu-jitsu programs alongside their friends, so identifying this in the communication with parents prior to enrollment would help aid in determining this factor. This learner analysis highlights that the learners are children with diverse experiences, meaning that the learning activities can be aimed towards how to employ these different experiences to share among the other learners so that the learning is more diverse. With regards to inclusivity, the intended curriculum is designed to cater to all learner groups, regardless of any variances in cultural or socioeconomic background. This is seen through the non-restrictive requirements employed in the jiu-jitsu gym on these factors. The only form of discrimination in assignment of class time is based off age group indicated on the gym schedule. Thus, it is not necessary to focus on any specific culture groups, as jiu-jitsu is a multicultural sport practiced across a diversity of nations. By using Bloom's taxonomy, instructional strategies can be proposed so as to enhance the alignment among the intended, enacted, and experienced curriculum with regard to children learning a double-legged takedown for jiu-jitsu. To help further this design decision, consideration on the learner group characteristics has been taken into account, as well as the important factor of how learners can be engaged while in pursuit of the learning outcomes. This strategy is structured so as to scaffold learners, guiding them from grasping basic concepts to engaging in increasingly complex problem solving. In order to do this, attention should be given to both the learner's processing of information as well as facilitation of the learner's processing. This builds off the distinction between supplantive or teacher-centered and generative, also known as learner-centered, strategies, as well as how each helps attain the intended learning outcomes as part of an effective design for instruction. Supplantive strategies involve providing learners with the information and guidance that is necessary to perform a double-leg takedown. This approach is particularly important for beginners and young learners who may require more explicit instruction on the technique. Supplantive strategies typically aim to facilitate the learning of core knowledge and skills at a foundational level. In the case of the technique highlighted in this discussion, instructors can demonstrate the technique while explaining key concepts and components that make it effective and work within the general context of jiu-jitsu. Additionally, they can break down the movements into manageable steps or chunks, and this allows for better highlighting of important areas of focus. Instructors can also provide learners with visual aids through repeated live demonstrations to help enhance understanding. This approach ensures that the learners have a clear and well-structured foundation of knowledge to build upon. And in comparison, generative strategies aim to foster active engagement and encourage the learner to apply their knowledge in different contexts. This approach promotes critical thinking and problem solving, which would typically be realistically encountered in the course of a jiu-jitsu sparring session or competition. Problem-based learning is defined as an approach where learners are presented with realistic scenarios and problems related to the topic of knowledge they are working to learn. They work in a collaborative manner to analyze the situation, identify useful strategies, and apply their knowledge to find a solution. In relation to the technique of focus in this discussion today, this method is a relevant strategy as it allows the learners to develop a deeper understanding of the takedown technique and the various nuances to it in a realistic and practical fashion. This in turn also aids in the enhancement of the decision-making processes of the learner and overall experience and application of the technique. Therefore, it is recommended that a combined approach using supplantive and generative strategies should be employed when teaching a jiu-jitsu technique. By doing so, instructors can provide a balanced approach towards instruction that supports both knowledge acquisition and the development of higher order thinking skills in performing any of the techniques being taught. In pursuit of aligning the intended, enacted, and experienced curriculum, which we discussed last time, there must be careful consideration with regards to designing a cohesive and meaningful learning experience as part of the instructional design. Several principles of instructional design have been proposed by researchers that can help in this alignment process. They include gaining the attention of the learners, informing them of the instructional objectives for the day, stimulating recall of any prior knowledge, presenting the content, providing guidance and practice related to the content, facilitating performance, as well as supplying feedback and assessing the performance of the learners. Gaining attention should be employed to ensure learners are engaged and focused at the moment of learning, which in the case of teaching the technique such as a double leg takedown, the instructor can use attention-grabbing techniques such as demonstrating the technique while highlighting its practicality and relevance. In order to clearly inform the learners of the instructional objectives, the main goals and outcomes desired when using a double leg takedown can be clearly articulated and explained to the learners that day. Next, to facilitate learning, the learners should be provided with relevant information, which can come in the form of the jiu-jitsu instructor breaking down the technique into smaller components with explanations for each step along the way. In order to enhance retention, the learners should be provided ample practice time and opportunities to apply the new technique that they are learning in various scenarios. Feedback should then be provided to help correct any errors and reinforce correct execution of the technique being focused on. Moreover, the need for assessment is significant, and within the context of jiu-jitsu, this could involve evaluating the execution of the technique through formative assessments such as drills or even simulated sparring situations. And last, the principles of enhancing retention and transfer of knowledge should be considered. This can be found in the form of providing opportunities for the learners to practice the double leg takedown in realistic contexts, such as live sparring sessions or even in competitions themselves. This would, in turn, create connections between the technique and its application in different situations, which can then promote the transfer of learning effectively. In summary, the incorporation of combined supplantive generative strategy derived from Bloom's taxonomical analysis fits well to enhance the alignment of the intended, enacted, and experienced curriculums for the selected focus of this discussion, which is the double leg takedown. This approach helps to identify the targeted learner group of children in the pursuit of developing jiu-jitsu technique skills. As jiu-jitsu practitioners, the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective domains are important for the development of skills within the context of the sport. Through this, it is then possible to determine a model which can address the learning preferences of this group of learners. As such, with this taxonomic analysis and the recommended strategies, alignment concerning the intended, enacted, and experienced curriculum can be enhanced. Moreover, there is potential to use this approach with other jiu-jitsu techniques, not just the double leg takedown, and minimal changes will need to be made. Furthermore, replacing the learner group from children to adults also appears to be feasible, with minor adjustments required as to instructional language choices and activities. The argument for this is that there is a near universal approach to teaching techniques due to how the intertwining systems of jiu-jitsu techniques are connected to one another, as well as there being uniformity in techniques across all age groups, with the only variances coming in what techniques are deemed permissible in competitions by the likes of the IBJJF, Abu Dhabi Jiu-Jitsu Pro, ADCC Opens, and so on. With that said, there is limited literature regarding instructional design development within the specific context of jiu-jitsu, which means further exploration on this topic is going to be needed for greater depth to be achieved. So, to wrap this all up, in the end, it is all about alignment, making sure the intended curriculum, what we plan to teach, the enacted curriculum, what we actually teach, and the experienced curriculum, what the students actually learn, are all working together in cohesion. While it's impossible to have perfect alignment, the closer we can get them into alignment with each other, the greater opportunity we have to create a learning environment that's not just effective, but empowering. So, that's it for today's episode and this overarching discussion on jiu-jitsu curriculum as a whole. I hope this gave you some new insights into how we can teach jiu-jitsu more effectively, especially to our younger students. If you enjoyed this, please share it with your fellow coaches, instructors, or anyone who's passionate about martial arts and education. You can also find me on Blue Sky talking about these sort of topics with my new handle, @grapplers.win. That's GRAPPLERS.WIN. And that is also my URL for my web space, where you can find more of my written work on top of what you can find over at Fight Island. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time.